Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Welcome, everyone. I'm very excited to join you tonight. As many of you know, MML's incomparable Candace Donahoe did retire at the end of October, and I have the great pleasure of stepping into her role as Director of Government Relations. I'm very excited to be a part of MML. It's been a wonderful couple of months so far, and I look forward to working with all of you over the years. So traditionally, of course, this event would be an in-person legislative dinner, but with the pandemic, we are pivoting to this virtual format. We are very excited and grateful to have Senator Zucker, Delegate Korman, and I see Delegate Carr here as well with us this evening as our distinguished guests. So I will go through MML's legislative priorities for the 2021 session. And then we will turn it over to you, Senator Zucker and Delegate Korman, and Delegate Carr, if you'd like to speak as well, you're more than welcome to. We look forward to hearing your feedback about your priorities for the 2021 session, and then we can take some questions from our members. We also have MML's Scott Hancock, Justin Fiore, and Paula Chase Hyman here, as well as our Legislative Committee Chair, Councilman Romanell. So we are here and happy to answer any and all of your questions. So with that, I will go ahead and jump in. All right, so I'm sure that this looks familiar to most everyone. Our cities, of course, and towns are just beginning to make headway on the tremendous backlog of road repair projects due to the significantly reduced HUR funding over the last 10 years. And of course, more work still lies ahead. As a bit of background, highway user revenues are generated from various taxes and fees that are imposed at the state level and distributed to local governments using a formula that's based on road miles and vehicle registrations. In order to receive HUR funds, municipalities are required by law to request their HUR allotment at the beginning of every fiscal year and report to the state what they use the monies for at the end of each fiscal year. And these slides identify some of the uses of HUR monies that are permitted by state law. Now, local governments have partnered with the state for decades to share the cost of maintaining both state and local roads. This partnership was intact until the Great Recession hit the state in 2009, which is when we saw municipal HURs cut by about 96%. That's a total of approximately $45 million a year to just down to $1.6 million. And that was to be distributed among all cities and towns. This is shown here by the big drop in the blue bars that you'll see on the left side of this graph. And since the initial transportation revenue reduction first occurred back in 2009, municipalities have been underfunded by a total of $287 million. That's shown here by the red bars. Now in fiscal year 2014, the state started adding transportation grants in each state budget, which is shown here by the yellow bars. And although the additional revenue was welcome, this process was unreliable and unsustainable when municipalities were attempting to plan the road projects several years in the future. So in 2018, MML was successful in advocating for legislation to increase municipal HURs back up to about 85% of full funding. But the legislation also included a sunset stating that after fiscal year 2024, municipal transportation funding will drop from about $39 million all the way down to $8 million. In 2020, the Senate unanimously passed a bill to eliminate the funding cliff, that sunset provision in 2024, and instead continue the current elevated level of funding in perpetuity. But with the pandemic, as session raced towards an early conclusion, the House unfortunately failed to act on that bill. In addition to drastic underfunding of local HURs, the cost of providing and maintaining safe infrastructure have continued to skyrocket. A return to the low levels of funding recently experienced would really have a devastating impact on the progress that our cities and towns have made to date on their huge backlog of transportation projects. So during the 2021 General Assembly session, MML is planning to work with legislators to hopefully eliminate the 2024 sunset provision and to restore municipal HURs to full funding. Thank you very much for your time. And legislators, I'd be happy to turn it over to you for your presentation. We were sent a presentation earlier this afternoon, so I'll go ahead and pull that up as well. One moment.
Thank you very much, Angelica. Before we get started, I know a number of our colleagues jumped on since you started, so I just wanted to turn it over to Delegate Korman to recognize those members that are on.
Thanks, Senator. As you mentioned, we have Delegate Al Carr, Vice Chair of the Montgomery County House Delegation, also a former member of the Kensington Town Council. We have Delegate Julie Plakovich Carr, also a former City Council member in Rockville. We have Delegate Laura Charcudian, a resident of the city of Tacoma Park, and Delegate Emily Shetty. I apologize, Delegate Shetty. I'm not sure of your Muni connection, other than you have a lot of great municipalities in your district, District 18. Thanks, Senator.
Well, thank you very much, Delegate Korman. And, as we go through, we'll try to recognize legislators that jump on. But we just had, since we're in this era of Zoom, we thought we would just do a quick slideshow presentation of sort of where we are and where we're going. If you could just start with number 1, please. And, typically I get invited by the town of Brookville and the town of Laytonsville, so I'm glad I'm able to sit at both of the virtual tables today in Zoom. But the first slide that we get to, we'll talk about an agenda, and we'll just give an overview of where we are in terms of the Senate and the House makeup. So if you can go to the next slide, and we'll give a COVID update, quick COVID update, and then really what you're here for, a 2021 legislative preview and how that relates to the Maryland Municipal League, and then we'll help answer any questions. You can turn to the next slide. Both Delegate Korman and I come from a fantastic county. We have 8 senators. Out of the 8 senators, 7 are in leadership. 1 is a full committee chair, 3 vice chairs. We have the Senate Majority Leader, Senate Majority Whip, and I serve, as you can see, as the Senate Democratic Caucus Chair. Delegate Korman likes to say this many times, many places, that we have that the Montgomery County House Delegation is amongst the most diverse and powerful in the state. Almost every member of the Montgomery County House has some type of leadership post. As you can see, we have 2 of the 6 full committee chairs. We have the House Majority Leader, House Parliamentarian, 11 subcommittee chairs, of which Delegate Korman is one. I will say this because Delegate Korman is too humble. He serves as the chair of the Transportation Environment Subcommittee on Appropriations. He is one of the budget experts of the state, so much so that I have to clarify when I say if you have budget questions, refer them to Korman. I clarify because what's happened is people are sending him their personal budgets, and I have to say it's state budgets, but he's been a leading voice, and we have, they have 10 new members of the House of Delegates from Montgomery County that started in 2019. 3 of them who already have full House leadership positions. So with that, we'll turn over to the next slide. I won't spend too much time on this, but this will really dictate sort of where we're going to be going this legislative session, and it reflects 3 things: COVID, COVID, and COVID. We've seen positivity rates go up over the last couple weeks, and hospitalizations have reached a peak. If you can turn to the next slide. In Montgomery County, here's some statistics on Montgomery County. I mean, you see it on the municipal level every day. We just wanted to put it out in writing. We've seen an increase in the 7-day positivity rate. If you can turn to the next slide. And I'm going to turn it over now to Delegate Korman.
Thanks, Senator Zucker. And let me just say, when I got elected to the House, I was put on the Appropriations Committee, where Craig was one of the subcommittee chairs at the time. So anything I know about the budget, I actually learned from him. So send him those personal budget questions that you have. This is just the current state of play in terms of the rules we have to try to limit the spread of COVID-19. Obviously, these have been changing, and sometimes the county and the state have parted ways. And I know you're all facing this on the front lines, but this is just sort of some of the things we're trying to do to get COVID-19 under wraps until the vaccine can be distributed and we can sort of get back to more of a normal life. If you can flip to the next slide. So, the primary portal for state government for COVID-19 is that website at the top. It's got lots of data dashboards, as do many of our county and local governments, to show what's going on in those places. And obviously, every member of our 32-member delegation is spending a lot of time trying to assist people, whether it's connecting them to testing resources, which we've done a lot of, helping people with unemployment insurance issues, which has been a huge part of all of our daily diets lately in terms of our constituent service work. Trying to connect small businesses to the different state and federal programs with our federal partners. We've been spending a huge amount of time doing that. And obviously, again, connecting people to testing. There's a lot of great state and also county testing resources. Every week, as you all know, the county issues a list of testing sites. Many of them have been hosted by municipalities. I know about ones in Tacoma Park, and then in my neck of the woods in Friendship Heights. Really important resource to make sure everyone has access to testing. Next slide, please. And so we now get to our legislative preview, which I know is the main event here that you all are interested in. Just a quick roadmap, session outlook, some legislative topics, budget impact, since you've got two budget nerds here, the governor's vetoes, and then transportation and infrastructure. We can talk more about HUR, which I know is your number one, and it sounds like only priority for the 2021 legislative session. So that's right in my wheelhouse. So it's great that you're prioritizing that. Next slide. So obviously, our next session is going to look very different from our prior sessions. And this quote unquote dinner is a great example of that. We're not going to be meeting with all of you knees apart in our offices, and we're not going to be meeting with each other elbow to elbow in the same way in Annapolis. If you look at the picture of the Senate floor there, which is on the right, they have these plexiglass partitions that have been put up. In the House, we're actually going to be spread across two different House floors. The Montgomery County Delegation Room that many of you have been in sort of shares a larger space with the Baltimore County Delegation. The partition there has been removed, and we're going to have a House floor there, a House floor annex, and then our normal House floor. Those are going to be meeting simultaneously with two-way systems. Our committees are going to be mostly virtual. I think the Senate's going to have some in-person committees, depending on how the status of public health is, but all of the House committees are going to be virtual. Many of the members are choosing to do their meetings virtually rather than doing anything in person, at least on the House side. To get into the building, you need a House staff escort. There's not just going to be free range through the building. These measures are temporary. They're not designed to limit access or limit participation or limit transparency. They're designed to limit the spread of COVID-19 and improve the public health situation. I will say in some ways, they're going to make things more accessible for many of our residents around the state. It's a good hour from many parts, if not more, from Montgomery County to Annapolis. It's going to be nice to be able to submit testimony virtually, electronically, to watch everything on streaming, which has not been the case with all parts of the House and Senate operations historically. So there are some silver linings, but I know we all look forward to getting back to a more normal environment beyond that. Next slide, please. I think I'm going to turn it over to you, Chair Zucker. Is that right?
I think you've got this is your you've got one more, and then I take over. In the next slide, sir. Sorry,
you can tell who set the agenda. My senior colleague. So obviously, you know, some of the big issues we're going to be facing. No surprises here. Number one is economic recovery, which is tied very closely to healthcare and the public health situation. The economic situation we're in is really tied to what's been happening with the public health situation. Both are going to require some action on our part. You know, in terms of the economy, I think you're going to see a lot of efforts to try to help small businesses, to try to help with rental assistance, renters' rights, things related to people who are really suffering because of what's going on with the economy. On the healthcare side, we've had some great advances in the state of Maryland on bolstering our Obamacare exchange by creating a reinsurance program, creating a system of consumer protection so that even if Obamacare is struck down by the Supreme Court, the things like no discrimination based on pre-existing conditions would still be the law of the land in Maryland. There's just going to be more to do now because of COVID-19. On the police reform and accountability, I think you've seen a commitment in both chambers to move forward on making some changes. I know that's important to many of you because some of you have your own municipal police forces. In the House, just yesterday, the official recommendations of our police reform work group were released. You can find those online. If you follow me on Facebook or Twitter, I've posted those. In the Senate, the chair of the Judicial Proceedings Committee in the Senate, Will Smith from Montgomery County, has already held a series of bill hearings on legislation so that we're ready to move very quickly when we get back to Annapolis in January. And then on the education front, this is going to overlap a little bit, I think, with some discussion Craig is going to do about some veto overrides. But, you know, it's still the case, despite everything that's going on, in fact, more than ever, that education is the #1 priority for Montgomery County. It's the #1 priority for the state of Maryland. A lot of what we need to do is actually no different today than it was before the pandemic. Now, it's not to say the pandemic hasn't shown us some of the creaks, but we always needed more broadband for our students. We always needed more resources for families that are more in need. We just recognize it now more than ever. Thankfully, the Blueprint for Maryland's Future was going to start to get a head start on those things. And so we already sort of have a roadmap in place that we're going to be able to follow. We also need to address the Built to Learn Act. You know, right now students aren't in the schools, but I promise you, as someone with 2 young kids at home, students have to go back to school. It has to happen eventually. We cannot go on this way. I know Chair Zucker and Delegate Shetty and Delegate Polakovich-Carr and Delegate Carr and Delegate Charkoudian are all in the same vote when it comes to having kids at home. It's still the case that the classroom space we have in Montgomery County is insufficient for the number of students we have. We passed great legislation last year called the Built to Learn Act that was tied to one of the governor's vetoes to really supercharge school construction funding in Montgomery County. We're going to have to act on that again this legislative session. Next slide, please.
Well, thank you.
Turn it back to Chair Zucker.
Thank you. And, you know, Chairman Korman, you mentioned, you know, the struggles we've been having with distance learning. Just so everybody knows, I used to have long hair. I didn't get a haircut. I pulled it out. Look, we don't want to be partisan here. We just wanted to sort of lay out with this slide what the upcoming agenda is going to be for the General Assembly. And what we're going to be coming back to is roughly 3 dozen bills that have been vetoed by the governor. A lot of them are bipartisan revenue bills that we are going to need, especially in this era of COVID, where we're seeing holes and help with needing an economic recovery. Some of the vetoes that were done, as Chair Korman mentioned, is the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which passed in the Senate by overwhelmingly bipartisan support. Even the minority leader, Republican minority leader, voted for it. And as Chair Korman says, we're eventually going to get the kids back in the buildings. And a lot of this, especially with the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, has already been budgeted for and has been paid for, at least for the first 2 to 3 years. And we're hoping to, again, have an ongoing conversation with the governor on this to make sure that we're looking out for all Marylanders. If you could turn to the next slide. And before we get into where we're going, we just wanted to talk about sort of where we've been and how COVID has impacted the Maryland budget. It's really impacted in 3 ways. One is the spending that we've done toward direct response to COVID. And in the wisdom of the General Assembly, before we adjourned, the senators and delegates alike, we gave the governor flexibility where he can tap into the reserve fund, and he had flexibility to go toward these very things. I mean, I think recently you heard about the governor directing another $250 million or $90 million to help toward the COVID response when it came to tapping that reserve fund. Yes, we gave him that ability. That's why he was able to do it. And it was in particular important because we weren't going to be in session, so we needed to make sure that he was able to do that. And then we've seen an uptick in entitlements. And where does that leave us? I mean, it leaves us with a continued structural deficit hole, which means that we're spending more than we're getting in. And that resulted in about a 10% decline in revenues. And what's really been hurt is the Education Trust Fund. That's the money that's generated from casinos, gambling. And this past year, we saw $150 million less of that. If you can go to the next slide. I won't spend too much time on this slide. This is talking about the first CARES Act, the first amount of money that came into Maryland, which most of it has already been expended. I think what Chair Korman and all of our colleagues would say is when we're looking at the fiscal outlook and where we see a rays of hope is if the federal government is able to do another CARES Act, that will really help us, especially if you can use it to helping to bridge any budget gaps we may have. If you go to the next slide. So, you know, we actually didn't expect, if you could see this, I mean, obviously the COVID-19 pandemic created an unprecedented level of uncertainty when it came to public health and created an economic crisis. The Board of Revenue estimates had come out with estimates that were actually more serious than what actually came about. And that was because of we had unexpected benefits from the CARES Act. So it leaves us with some additional money in cash. But as you can see in the out years, we're looking at billions of dollars worth of more money that we're spending than getting in. And that is a direct result of everything COVID related. I'm now going to turn it over to Chair Korman to finish up the slides.
Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is just sort of a roadmap of what's expected for local governments in the next budget. Now, obviously, a lot of this is driven by formulas. As you all know, you're very involved in this. When the governor's budget proposal comes in, it will most likely include what's called a BRFA, a Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, that may affect some of the formulas. It'll probably have to affect some of the formulas. Even in some of our much better budget years, that's become pretty common to have to alter formulas to deal with the budget situation. As you know, unlike the federal government, we don't have our own central bank. We don't have our own currency printing presses. We have to have a balanced budget. And so it's very common to see changes to the formulas, but this is sort of the expected outlook for the coming year in terms of aid to local governments, which I know is extremely important to all of you. Next slide. So Transportation Trust Fund, I like to talk about this anyway, but obviously it's particularly important given your interest in highway user revenue. Anytime there's an economic slowdown, there's usually some blow to Transportation Trust Fund revenue. Our Transportation Trust Fund, aside from sort of federal dollars, is funded by things like the gas tax, titling tax, various MVA fees, some revenue that comes in through the airport and the Port Authority, the Port Administration. Sort of a separate pot of money is the toll roads, the Maryland Transportation Authority toll roads, revenues of people who ride the bus or the subway, and then some corporate income taxes. All of those things are obviously somewhat susceptible to economic headwinds, but a shutdown like we saw for basically 2 months is unlike anything this Transportation Trust Fund has ever seen before. And of course, a lot of that is still with us. If you look at the Marc train system, for example, the really well-named commuter rail system in the state of Maryland, its ridership is still down about 95% if you look at it from a year ago. If you look at bus service in the city of Baltimore, which is state funded, that's down to about 40 to 45% of a year ago. If you look at the airport, that's also down somewhere around 85%. Traffic now is down, road traffic for cars, not trucks, is down to about 80 to 85% of normal. For a while, it was down much more than that. And all that has a huge impact on Transportation Trust Fund revenue, the money we use for highway user revenue and other infrastructure investment. In past economic crises, the Transportation Trust Fund has actually been a pot of money that's been tapped into for other purposes. This is a scenario where actually the Transportation Trust Fund actually, may itself need an injection from other sources. So you can see here some of the big cuts that are projected to be made, and these are on operating side and the capital side of our transportation budget. I put at the bottom there what highway user revenue looks like. The good news is because it was sort of something of a temporary pause in a lot of the revenue sources, and I asked about this at a budget hearing last week with the transportation secretary, they don't expect huge long-term cuts to HUR. HUR is basically funded as a percentage of a certain section of the Transportation Trust Fund, basically the gas tax revenue. And so they're not expecting a huge sort of long-term hit to what was expected when that deal was made in 2018 that Angelica spoke about. It's not a hugely growing pot either because of what we've been seeing. And of course, the current legislative formula does expire after fiscal year 24, what you were calling a funding cliff. And so if you sort of look at the transportation 5 or 6 year transportation budget, you will see a huge drop after fiscal 24 because of the expiration of that deal that was passed in 2018. Next slide. So, again, I sort of covered transportation in the age of COVID-19. It's just very different. And that, roadway there, things are a little, that was a rush hour picture actually of the Beltway. Things are not quite that empty anymore, but, there still has not been the return to congestion-based traffic the way we had before COVID-19. Now, there's still weather-based traffic, car accident-based traffic, but we haven't had the situation where the bottlenecks have come back the way they were pre-COVID just from volume. And it's hard to know, frankly, when and if that's going to change, because clearly in our area in particular, where we have a lot of white collar workers who are able to telecommute, that's going to be a somewhat permanent change. I mean, I don't think we're in a situation where people are never going to offices again, but it's not clear that a lot of office environments are going to return to the pre-COVID, everyone shows up at 9, everyone leaves at 6 Monday through Friday situation. Of course, that'll impact transit as well. I easily could have shown you a bus or a train car that was also empty like this. And so there's just going to be a lot of changes that are going to have some degree of permanence that we're going to have to deal with and address going forward. Now, on highway user revenue, I think, Angelica covered this really well. I'll just say, as chair of that subcommittee, Craig mentioned, I'm very well aware of the sort of funding cliff issue. It's important to every county and municipality. I'll say it's even more important to counties and municipalities that don't have really large scale transportation projects like the Purple Line being developed in them, because for them, that really is sort of the big transportation funding they rely on is HUR. So very aware of it, very understanding that we cannot certainly have the cliff that that is sort of projected right now in the out years. The good news is that cliff is not tomorrow. That cliff is not next fiscal year. It's a few fiscal years from now. So I'm not saying it won't happen this legislative session. I don't know the answer to that yet, to be honest with you. I haven't seen all the bills that have come in from folks like Delegate Anderton, who have really been leaders in trying to extend out the program. But we're definitely all aware of it and understand that it can't go from where it is today to where it's projected to be in FY25 without any intervention from the General Assembly. So definitely working on it, understand the importance of it. And next slide. And this is just how to reach us. And we also both put our information in the chat as well. And happy to